Hello and welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast brought to you by Renthal Street. Check out renthal.com for off-road, on-road and plenty of other parts for your bikes. On today's podcast, we're going to be looking forward to the second MotoGP pre-season test at Buriram. But we've got David Emmett back in Europe. And Dave, you've been able to have your flyaway experience for now to go to the Sepang Test. It must be nice to have gotten back home.
It was nice to get back home, but it was also quite nice to be in Sepang. I do like Malaysia. I met one of our lovely patrons who explained a few things about Malaysia to me. That was great. Really appreciated that. So shout out to Daksha. And it was just nice to actually sort of wander up and down pit lane and look at bikes and go out and watch the people on track and see who's looking comfortable and who's lying to us and who isn't.
You were on your haunches a lot, Dave. Every photo I saw of you, you were leaned down, looking almost like with a little magnifying glass at some of the details of the bikes.
It's the squats. It's, at my age, it's important to keep yourself nice and lean and fit and flexible. So as much squatting as possible.
David Emmett with the pert arse. But Adam, obviously enough for you, you're not going to Buriram for the test, but you'll be going to Buriram for the opening round of the year. So this is the last chance of freedom really for a while for you.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. It was just a little bit too far. I mean, Qatar was like a nice compromise because it's just a direct flight. It's probably a little bit cheaper in some ways, but Buriram is just, it's a bit of a hike. So having the second test there was a little bit difficult for logistics, and especially because we start the season in a quite sort of frenetic way, and there's Supercross going on, there's motocross going on, so it's all a bit crazy at the moment. Is this the first time we've done a podcast with all four of us this year?
Yes,
could be. Yeah.
Wow. So you've been too busy with Superbikes, Steve. Too much content. You're making us looking a bit shoddy on the GP side.
Well, do you know what the thing with it is that's interesting is because you've mentioned there about the cost of everyone going to Buriram for the test. This week in Superbikes, obviously everyone's getting ready to go to Phillip Island. So it looks like a lot of publications are sending their Superbike journalists to the Buriram test to try and just make sure you're able to get the best bang for your buck. So it is a little bit of a strange one this week, actually, like you were saying, just because Qatar was relatively easy for everyone. And a little bit like that with Malaysia as well. You can fly directly to Kuala Lumpur from a lot of major European cities. So it was easy for those two tests. This one's that little bit more difficult. And then everyone has to justify either staying out or coming home. So it's one of those ones where it's a bit of a different test. But Neil, I know you guys talked about it last week. I missed you on After the Flag last week. I'll miss you again this week.
Well, thank you, Steve. Yeah. I mean, the diary is pretty full for this week, next week, and the week after. So it means that we're pretty much back in business. I did enjoy those sort of 3 days during the week for a few of the weeks, during January. But they are looking few and far between.
Dave, just for the Buriram test, obviously, it's another opportunity for another 3 days of running.
2 days, but yes, it's extremely. The odd thing is normally, Ad was talking about the Qatar test. Normally, it's like about a week, 10 days after the Sepang test, and normally it's about a week, 10 days after the first test at Sepang, which gives the factories enough time to actually produce stuff. But because there was the Sepang test and then the launch and then straight into the Buriram test, there isn't really a great deal of time for anyone to actually build anything specifically for the for the Buriram test. And then there's something like, 2 weeks before the start of the season? So it's a bit of an odd one, really. This is not the usual way of doing things. To an extent, I presume it's also cost. It's probably a lot more tied in with the launch in Bangkok, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it is odd. Really, this is more. The Buriram test is more of an extension of the Sepang test than it is a completely separate entity with new bits and bobs to test.
Well, it's also getting set up for the GP, isn't it? It's almost like an extra practice day.
Yeah, but I mean, it always is. So the last day of the last day of the last preseason test is always basically just set up for the race. But the first day there will often be sort of new things, especially aero, because aero is the sort of thing that you can actually produce in a relatively short period of time, and so. You would often see people bringing new aero stuff, but I'm not sure there's going to be enough time for them actually to build new aero. They'll be bringing the aero which they either tried at Sepang or didn't get around to trying to Sepang to have a go at Buriram.
Ad, do you know one of the things I really miss from preseason testing? Do you remember GP0? Whenever it used to be like a 1 hour time attack for
that was
an M3 or something like that.
Yeah, I think the first time they ran it was 03 at Catalunya, and that was when Ducati just blasted everybody in the radar trap, and Loris Capirossi sort of walked away with a brand new car and had this bizarre look on his face, like, how did I earn that? But yeah, it was. I still think it's a thing. They could probably do that again, whether it's you televise it or monetize it or whatever. But it still just generates a bit of hype.
I mean, for me, I think the thing was it was in Europe, and so there was quite a lot of fans there as well. I think there was one in 2009 that I went to, and that was probably the last time that they did it. But it had loads of fans. It was televised. It was on sort of live, European TV. So that sort of works, and that's a lot more difficult to do when you are in Buriram, for example.
Well, the one thing about it is it was always done a lot of the times at where the first round was. I remember Jerez hosted it a lot, and I thought it was really good to be able to have something like that where you can have that to kick off the start of the season, because everything gets shipped out very early. And even for this week in Buriram, you're looking at 2 weeks before the start of the season. So everything is already there. Like, fair enough, you've got your costs of track operators for cameras or this, that, or the other. But it could be something that could be really cool to be able to bring back. I think especially now. The
point is, Steve, is just with 22 GBs now and also the sprints, there maybe just not a need for it anymore.
Maybe. I think it's just one of those ones where if you've got the test and maybe you keep off that last, or you keep out at an hour-long window just for televising something from the test, rather than what we have at the moment with just the highlights packages and that. I always thought it was quite a cool one, but like you said, the calendar is an awful lot bigger now than it's ever been, and we've added a new event to the calendar as well with the season launch. And Neil, I wanted to hear from you about that first, just to see what your thoughts on the Bangkok city launch were.
Well, I'm not going to lie and say that I watched it from absolute start to finish, but I did have it on in the background while I was doing a few things about the house on Sunday. And I mean, if you wanted to present a picture of a sport that looked high-tech and cool, one or two little gremlins with the audio aside in the first maybe 15 minutes. But if you wanted to showcase a sport which looked high-tech and very popular and also pretty professional, I mean, it looked pretty glitzy, and it was right in the downtown part of Bangkok, next to a pretty flash fancy hotel. I thought it did a pretty good job of that. And I don't think it was designed for the absolute hardcore fans to be tuning in, watching in, but I think the kind of the photos that they were able to send out were really quite impressive. So, I mean, it looked like a big investment, but it also looked like a really cool thing, and definitely like a cool idea, I think, following Formula One's lead, which has done this and is doing this in London, I think, in the next week or so. But yeah, I think a really cool idea and a great way to drum up some interest, especially ahead of the GP there. Not that it really needs to be drummed up in somewhere like Thailand, to be fair, because we usually have good attendance there and very enthusiastic support. But no, it looked. I think the pictures looked great. MotoGP looked like it was presented in the kind of the way that we're hoping it will be.
It's just about fanfare, isn't it? And you have to think, do you do something like this or you do nothing at all? I think it's better to do something like this because you're making a bit of hype. You're making a bit of a big deal about it. Everything that Neil said, I completely agree with. You could probably say, did it go on a bit too long? And then you can see that there are certain riders, certain teams that are kind of familiar with this kind of spectacle. They know how to handle it, how to judge it. You know, when you had Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia on stage, they're starting up and revving the bike and sort of milking it and really playing to the crowd, that was the sort of thing, this kind of event needs. Otherwise, it just gets a bit formulaic. I think Formula One, they're making a step up. I believe they're even selling tickets for the public. So you have to maybe look at the whole billing that they have there. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be live music or extra events happening around this sort of spectacle. I think that's a different kind of thing. I mean, this was just like, hey, listen, MotoGP's here. It's 2025. Here we go. And I thought it looked spectacular. And full credit to like the people who are looking after the TV broadcast, because that sort of thing can be difficult, I think, to make it look interesting for a sustained period of time. But the way they had the drone shots and everything sort of spanning around this what looked very busy location, I just thought it was cool. I thought it was good. And the whole visual image that we were introduced to MotoGP at the end of 2024 also looked pretty special as well. I thought the whole thing just looked more modern.
Yeah, I didn't watch it. My excuse is that I was travelling. I had to catch the train from KLIO 2 to KLIO 1 to check in for my flight. But
was your phone not working, Dave?
Yeah, did the train last an hour?
Yeah, I was out of coverage. No, but I mean, it's not really. It's not my thing. But just sort of like reading around the sort of the reception, the way the fans responded to it, it seemed like a really good initiative. I felt that what it really needed was them to do, because I think they were mostly on street bikes. It would have been really good for them to actually do it on the MotoGP bikes, because there is nothing quite so terrifying as the sound of a MotoGP bike being revved up. And again, it wouldn't have had to be. It would have been extremely expensive and a lot more sort of error prone. I think Alex Hoffman managed to break his wrist doing a wheelie on the Kawasaki. Or this would have been about 2006, 2007 a launch in Portugal. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a great initiative. To me, it's more, there's a few things that need fine tuning around the edges. Even if they did it perfectly, I will be honest, I probably still wouldn't watch because it's not my thing. But yeah, it's great for generating hype, generating excitement, and getting people sort of just blowing people away with the awesome spectacle, which is MotoGP.
But Steve, do you reckon it would work in Europe? Because this is also maybe something where you get a lot of the Thai fans, and they were going bananas, to be honest. It's hard to imagine something like that having the same sort of impact in, say, London or Paris or, I don't know,
Walthamstow.
I think it's one of those ones where I think, you know what?
A storm in Dundalk. It would be absolutely, the streets would be full.
You say Dundalk. It does have a MotoGP team in Dundalk, so I will give it some credit for having MLAV Racing registered in Dundalk. But I think for me, it's one of those things. I actually quite like the fact that we had two presenters that, obviously, I have no idea who they are. They're two Thai lads, so they might be big stars in Thailand. But I thought it was quite good to have some new faces for it as well. Because if we had it just rolled out with the same as what we have for the After the Flag show, I think it would have looked pretty bad for the championship. I think this was quite good to have it where you've got new faces, you're putting resources into it, you're in the middle of a big city. Like Bangkok is a ridiculous city whenever you go to it, and where the Ritz is, there's glitz and glam in Bangkok, and then there's the exact opposite of that. But where this launch is where the money is in Bangkok, where the money is in Thailand. Southeast Asia is a massive market for us, obviously, so it's important to do things like that in a country like that. If we were doing this launch in Qatar, it would be flat as a pancake because you're just not going to have the crowd there. But I think it's one of those things that we probably have to be aware of where we can put these things and then try and do it where you're building up a big audience. Like if you think of the NFL draft's actually a good comparison for it. And this used to always be held in New York. It was a big event. Everyone was going to it. But suddenly they started to move it around the country and it became a massive event. And I think that this is one of those things that could grow quite well. I think the comparison to F1 is going to be interesting to see what their launch is like in London. Like you were saying, it's going to be a different spectacle compared to what we had for MotoGP. But it'll also show us what you can do with a launch like that, because at the end of the day, Formula One's got the resources to be able to throw anything they want at it. And I think that that'll give us a good idea as well of where you could go with this in the future. But there's no reason why you couldn't do it in Europe. It might be where you're not doing it outside and you're doing it inside an arena, but I think you could easily transfer it to Europe.
Where's the glitz and glamour in Dundalk then, Steve?
Not on Bridge Street. That would be that would be a negative there. But there's a good nightlife street, Park Street. So that could be a good option for us. You could put it at maybe Ridley's. Nice night out for all the college students, and a bit of MotoGP thrown into the mix. So I'd have no problem with that. There's a lot of nice takeaways down at that end of the town as well. So you've got good options for Ducati. Will be happy. There's a good pizzeria beside us. There's a good sushi spot as well. So
Guinness drinking competition.
It ticks all the boxes.
I think we should go to Bangor.
Top management are listening in. Dundalk is the spot for next year.
You definitely end up with a few tax loopholes if you do it in Dundalk, I'd imagine. But they'll do a lot for cash. But just for you then as well, lad, just in relation to the launch, do you think is this something that they should do every year, or is this one of those things that's quite good to do as a standoff event or a standalone event?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much just to sort of wrap what we said, I think it has to happen. Otherwise, you're missing out on a trick, and it's maybe. I know we were still waiting for the Liberty Media acquisition to be signed, sealed, and delivered, which I guess is going to happen in June if it does, when it completes this second. Is it the second phase or the third phase?
Yeah, phase 2.
Then I think this is going to be like an ingredient of MotoGP, and it will be interesting. Kind of like, I guess you could say, the FIM Awards, where they tend to have this thing at the end of the year, gathering all the champions together, and then also announce the venue of where it's going to be the following year. Maybe it'll build some anticipation, and fans that don't usually get to see MotoGP on a frequent basis, then they could be recipients of an event that could grow and get a little bit more versatile, I could say, in terms of an entertainment package. And imagine doing it in Buenos Aires or in Sao Paulo or Rio, somewhere that's quite sort of significant, or Los Angeles, wherever. It just could be like another little entry to the canon of MotoGP events.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and definitely something that, depending on where you put it, could be really cool. But let's move back to the Sepang Test, because Dave, you were our boots on the ground in Malaysia. You were pretty busy all the way through the week, and as Neil said, you were getting your squats on just to make sure you were able to have a look at all of the little details on all the bikes. But what was the most interesting technical development that you saw?
I mean, for me, perhaps the most interesting technical thing was that there was very little new. There seemed to be a lot of the aero. The aero was all basically converging on the same idea. You've got your top wings, you've got your side wings, and you've got your ground effects fairing. You've got your downwash ducts. A lot of people were playing around with that. That looked very, very similar. To be honest, there's a few of the bikes where the changes were changes, but you really had to go and look at pictures, and it was so subtle that you couldn't really see anything. That was genuinely quite a surprise. There was a lot of work on electronics, not so much from Ducati, because Ducati have their electronics down. They are very, very good with that. It's the other factories which really need to work for it. For example, Marco Bezzecchi was saying about where the Aprilia was weak was in the electronics. It really needed the electronics working. And it's one of those areas where Yamaha have made a bit of a step. I suppose, if I had to say the biggest technical development, it's just a massive step forward that Yamaha have made. And that isn't one single item. That is the package of this new engine, which has a lot more power. They've been playing around with frames. The frames have helped. They're now capable of doing a really fast single qualifying lap. That to me was like the biggest thing. The other thing that we saw was on the back of the KTM or the back of the Honda, these massive, great big boxes, which may or may not contain a tuned mass damper. But certainly they're shifting a lot of weight to the rear of the bike in search of grip. So, for example, if you've ever seen a photo of the front fairing of the Ducati, it's the front, the nose is just full of tubes and pipes and all the hydraulic gudgeons. It's basically a hydraulic computer for working out how to operate the ride height device. Yamaha have that at the back of the bike. They actually have it in the tail because they want that weight over the rear. So that kind of weight balance thing is something we saw a lot of as well.
Honda had a pretty experimental rear end as well, Dave.
Yeah, it
but
looked like a pilot whale. It looked like the snout of a pilot whale, which I found really quite endearing.
Are we calling
think
it the Deliveroo box or the Global
No, I mean,
box?
look, the KTM's was definitely a Deliveroo box because it was generally just like a square. It was a square shape, so yeah, much more so than the Hondas. The Hondas was this lovely sort of bulbous. Looked more like a sonar thing. It really did look like it's got sort of rear-facing radar. Perhaps it's so that they know they're about to be passed and they need to pull over.
Well, Fabio Quartararo in his debrief was saying, I mean, he was kind of laughing, saying there's not much you can see on the bike that's new. It's all kind of inside. And, the aero certainly didn't seem particularly radical. Dave, do you reckon that people aren't going... I mean, we saw KTM have a bit of a drastic aero switch at the end of the Barcelona test, but it was pretty much for data gathering than anything else.
Yeah.
But do you reckon people are being a little bit conservative about this because we're coming to the end of this development cycle for 2027, or people are a little bit cagey about trying to sort of play to the Michelin tire guidelines?
Yeah, I mean, again, with the timing of it, it's all very, very difficult anyway. Also, because of the engine freeze, that is also like a big thing. So everyone is really, really concentrated on getting at least 3 factories without concessions. Aprilia, Ducati, and KTM all have to finalize the engines that they're going to use for the next 2 years for Buriram. So there was a lot of focus on figuring out the right engine, getting it right, getting the power delivery right, making sure that this is the best choice, because it's going to be so important. If they get it wrong, that they're really stuck with it for 2 years. And we'll come back to this later on when we talk about Ducati. But I suspect that they put a lot more effort and resources into that because that's what's really important now. They can develop aero. They've got 1 upgrade for the middle of this year. They've got 2 more upgrades for next year. We might see more resources go into aero for the second half of 25 and all of 26. Whereas now they really have to get the engine right before they start moving on to the 2027 engines.
I think it's one of those ones, Dave, that's always interesting to see where teams are putting those resources. And that's where Buriram's going to be really interesting, because it's always one of those cases where at that second test, some manufacturers do make a big step. And obviously we've seen it in the past where KTM have used that second test to really bring out their full package. So Buriram's going to be interesting to see what rolls down pit lane as well over the course of those couple of days testing.
Yeah, like Dave said, I mean, you've got one. I just hope it doesn't rain. I hope the weather plays well, because this is crucial hours and laps that the teams need. And we've had a couple of messages already from our colleagues and friends on the ground, the likes of sort of Cormac GP, saying that the weather is far less humid compared to the time of year where the Grand Prix is held, which is usually around late September or kind of October time.
October.
Yeah, October. And as we saw last year, the Grand Prix was kind of lashed with rain. So I just I hope that the climate plays ball in Buriram.
I just checked and it's going to be dry.
Fantastic.
I have to say, for us, when we've had superbikes there in the past, it was at this time of year, and it was always really nice. You ended up where it was just pretty easy temperatures to deal with for everyone. You were able to have it pretty comfortable for a lot of the weekend. It wasn't as humid. It wasn't, as bad as when you go to Sepang at the end of the season kind of thing. So that was always one of those events that actually made it a little bit easier for weather-wise. But we'll move it on to our next topic as well, and our first award of the show. And Neil, I'll come to you first. Who got out of the bed most eager at the Sepang test? Who wins that prize for you for the most promising start to the year?
Well, I'm going to place a crisp €5 note on it not being David Emmett, because I know for a fact that he was jet lagged out of his farter, as they say in Scotland. So
you just said he's been squatting.
Yeah, it was like 3 hours after he got out of bed. It wasn't like you had doing his stretches after he's just rolled out. But yeah, the most promising start. I think the story of the test in one way was the fact that Ducati just look as kind of strong as ever. We'll come on to them in a bit more detail in a bit, but I think the other big story was just how promising Yamaha looked. And I know it is just the first test of the season, and we shouldn't get too excited. But there were so many signs that that this was actually something quite hefty, and it wasn't just a one-off. I mean, Quartararo was inside the top 3 on all 3 days, which for a start showed that things were certainly looking up for them. And we were also seeing just a kind of strength and depth. Obviously, they have 2 more bikes on the grid this year, which is a massive help. But it wasn't as if Quartararo was first and Miller, Oliveira, and Rins were miles back, mired back in 16th or 17th, like we kind of saw at the start of 2022. You know, there were days where all 3 of those other guys were inside the top 10, inside the top 12. And yeah, you just had to listen to what some of the Ducati guys were saying. That I think Pecco said it looks as though Yamaha could be the manufacturer to step up and become our closest competitors this year. And when you take such talented people away from Ducati and you let them implement some of their ideas, like they did with Max Bartolini at the end of 2023, Yamaha's new technical director, then, you know, that is obviously going to pay off in some way. So, the lap times were promising. As Dave said, it looked like they were good in time attack. Quartararo was really fast all 3 days. And also he did a 6-lap run at the end of day 3. His average lap time in that run was just, I think, 1/10 of a second off what both the Marquez brothers did, who were the fastest over the sprint simulations. Obviously, the track was super gripped in and rubbered in by the 3rd and final day. And Quartararo was still pretty adamant that they still struggle in really low grip situations. So I think we're going to get a clearer idea of where Yamaha are at this week in Buriram. That'll probably tell us a bit more of just how far they've come. But certainly for the first kind of test of the year, they passed it with, I wouldn't say flying colours, but they certainly looked good. I think Quartararo summed it up nicely. He said optimistic, but not too optimistic.
I think it's one of those ones, Neil, that's interesting as well, because we obviously didn't get to see where Jorge Martin's at with Aprilia. We saw the KTM situation as well. I think it's very clear Yamaha has made progress. It's just going to be a question of whether or not it's made enough progress. And I know for us on Dave, for instance, I know you're not using much on social media at the moment, but you're on the Discord channel a lot for all of our patrons. And it seemed that almost every question you were being asked was about the Yamaha. There's a lot of excitement about whether or not this is real. And Yamaha has clearly made progress. It won't be enough because they've just got too much to make up compared to where Ducati were. But at least there's reasons for Quartararo fans to be excited going into the season and Yamaha fans to feel that maybe the light at the end of the tunnel isn't just the train about to hit you.
Yeah, I mean, if Yamaha were fighting for podiums, that would still be a massive step forward on where they were last year. Yeah. It got to the point at the end of last year where Fabio was fighting for top 5s, and we were thinking, wow, that's brilliant compared to where he was at the start of the year. So, you know, I think it is unrealistic to expect him to be up there challenging the likes of Mark and Pecco. That's not going to happen straight away. But sorry to jump in over you, Dave, but I think, you know, if they can be in that sort of top 5 conversation from the start of the season, and then maybe fighting for podiums maybe when we get back to Europe, then, you know, that's brilliant progress.
Yeah, I mean, top 5 has to be the target. It was also notable. I mean, Alex Rins had a decent test, but not an amazing test. Fabio had a fantastic test. Jack Miller actually adapted quite well. He after an utterly miserable start in Barcelona, he was definitely better than Miguel Oliveira on there. And he said, you know, this bike feels like mine. It was interesting that what Pecco Bagnaia said, because I've got the quote here, and he said, basically, I think we will have a switch in terms of who will be behind Ducati this season. Yamaha did a very good job. That wording, there'll be a switch in who's behind us. I think that's also because it was hard to see where Aprilia were, because, you know, Jorge Martin managed to smash himself up after 13 laps, and Raul Fernandez didn't last much longer. So there was only Ayogura, the rookie, Marco Bezzecchi, who's still adapting, and Lorenzo Savadori. Now, Savadori, you can't tell because he's not fast, but he is just a really good development rider. Bezzecchi was adapting himself quickly. I think definitely for the first half of the season, Yamaha are going to be right there. Then we'll see how long it takes for Aprilia to get up to speed, for Martin to adapt to the Aprilia, how good a job they've done of actually preparing the season. But in theory, the Aprilia should be a better bike. But yeah, I mean, Quartararo has just done a fantastic job, and I think top 5 is absolutely realistic.
Can I just temper expectation a little bit? I mean, with some of the reasons that Neil said, I think, especially like the Pramac boys have been in the shakedown. Yamaha had done that many laps there. The track was in fantastic condition. I think Yamaha made clear progress. It's fantastic to see 4 M1s on the grid. It will be this year. But I think there is still a lot of work to do, certainly judging by the comments of the riders. And it's not like we had 4 Yamahas in the top 6. So, I think just hedge your bets for the moment.
Yeah, I think for me, the big thing is there was 19 races won by Ducati last year in the GPs. They had all but 7 podiums. So even with Yamaha making loads of progress, they've still got all those Ducatis to get ahead of. They're going to be closer. And that's where, like, I always look at the percentage gap to the fastest. Whereabouts are you? Have you made that step? And then you're able to actually see progress. That could be a metric to be able to use for where Yamaha is at in terms of that progress they're making. But I don't really see it where we're going to see it in terms of suddenly they're finishing on the podium, suddenly they're up in the top 5 even. I think that it's one of those ones where it's just, are they a little bit closer to the front? And that'll be where we'll really see where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, Bagnaia did say we'll see a switch in who's second behind Ducati. So there's no doubt that Ducati is still the top team. But then,
He's
there's
paid
only
to
6.
say that.
Well, this is true, but also, I mean, it is just a blatant statement of facts as well. And there are only 6 Ducatis, not 8 like there were last year. There's only 3 factory bikes, but then again, which we'll come on to sort of in a moment, the GP25 versus GP24. There could basically be sort of 6 GP24s on the grids, 3 of which will be slightly better than the old bike.
Yeah, and I think just to move it on as well, Dave, obviously the new versus old bike for Ducati was a big discussion point all the way through the test. Where are Ducati actually at with what they're going to decide to do?
The problem was the new engine has a bit more power. It has smoother power delivery, but it's much worse in braking. And the thing is, you can't gain as much in acceleration as you can lose in braking. And so Bagnaia was very concerned. I mean, very concerned. He was clearly concerned that he could lose more if they moved to this GP25 engine, because to him, like, his braking is one of his strongest tools. It's one of his strongest weapons. It's how he has won a lot of races, and he really doesn't want anything taken away from that unless he gains somewhere else. And they basically said on the Friday in Sepang, look, we're not gaining enough in the acceleration phase that we're losing in braking. So I strongly suspect that what we will end up with is a GP24 engine in a GP25 frame, or a GP25 chassis, or a chassis with lots of new bits around the engine to help it. Because the other thing is that Bagnaia said, look, there is still potential to come from this engine. We haven't reached the absolute limit of it, so they can actually improve this. So it really feels like they will end up with the GP25 engine. And again, going to Buriram, very slippery surface, completely different track. That's going to change the feel of the bike. It's going to give everyone a clearer idea of whether the GP25 really is that much worse. And also the Ducati engineers will have had a chance to go through the electronics, figure out whether they can improve the behavior of the bike without with this existing engine, with this existing GP25 engine. But I mean, if you ask me to put a tenner on the table, I would say they will go with the GP24 engine and then just improve everything around it.
I think Marquez said that it was the Ducati problem, which was basically the most luxurious problem that you can have on the grid.
Oh no, we're really good.
Oh no, like if this new bike isn't good enough, we can just go back to the all-conquering bike of last year, which is still way better than any other bike on the grid. So yeah, and the comments that Mark was making was kind of hinting that he felt that what Dave was saying is the way to go. I think he was saying sometimes, one of his quotes was, "It helps to be conservative when you're in a real position of strength," which is true, which is completely logical. Which hints that he felt, okay, let's not risk everything on something that could go a wee bit wrong when we have this wonderful backup. And there are quite a few comments from that, along those lines from, I think, Davide Tollazzi as well during the test when he spoke to Jack Appleyard on the ground. So yeah, it's a wonderfully nice position to be in, and you just have to look at the likes of Alex Marquez, Franco Morbidelli, what they were doing during the test. I mean, I don't think any of us think that those two riders are on the same kind of plane as the likes of Marc Marquez, Pecco Bagnaia, Jorge Martin, Fabio Quartararo in terms of riding ability. They're maybe not in that absolute elite tier, but they're obviously very, very fine riders. But they were making everyone else look a bit silly on some of the days. Alex Marquez was the fastest of the lot with his sprint simulation, which was really seriously impressive on the final day. So yeah, the GP24s were just providing ample evidence of the fact that maybe it's not necessary to risk.
Yeah, spare a thought for Gigi Dell'Igna, because you make a fantastic motorcycle in 2023 and then you create arguably the best MotoGP bike ever in 2024, and it's like if you create the perfect soup, the only way you could go forward is by making one flavor stronger than the other, or it kind of goes off and stagnates a little bit. So there's not really anywhere else you can go in terms of culinary expertise. So I do hope that Ducati don't sort of drop the ball a little bit with the GP25. Maybe they could. Just another kind of thought as well. If there is one season where Pedro Acosta is probably thinking, that's another motorcycle, another need to be on, it could be this one, with the sort of last roll of the dice for the GP24. We could see some riders, I mean, like Neil says, that these guys are not on the same plane, but you could see Alex Marquez and Franco Morbidelli popping up with some really strong results.
Shades of 2023 test when Ducati, again, they struggled a bit with that engine. They ended up at Qatar actually going to sort of like a hybrid of the engine, which is why Jorge Martin really complained about the engine in 2023 because it wasn't as good as the engine which
2022 div.
Was that 2022? All right. Well, 2023, Luca Marini was fastest in the test on a GP22, and in the end it ended up not meaning anything. But because it's an established bike, it means that it already has an advantage.
I think we'll have to clip that, lad. We've just heard David say testing didn't mean anything. And I think
it means something to me in my heart.
I would also say as well, just about your soup. I did a cooking course, and it turns out that the only secret to making food more delicious is put in more butter. And if it needs a little bit more, put in more. Just keep adding butter
in soup. Oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
Just a bit of salt and oil, Steve. That's what you need.
And
as for Dave's testing,
this course said put it in everything. No matter what it is.
Yeah,
butter.
Yeah, butter, oil, salt, and sugar.
Well, Dave stayed so long in Malaysia after the test. I thought he was just going to hang around for the 2026 pre-season test.
Butter, oil, salt, sugar. Is that like a kind of crap rip-off Red Hot Chili Peppers album, Dave? Or...
It was. Yes, that's right. The food-based one.
Let's move it on to our rookies as well. And Ad, who was the top performing rookie for you? We have Ayagura, Fermin Aldeguer, and Chantra as well.
Courtesy of the bike, you have to say Fermin Aldeguer. I mean, he posted the better times, looked in good shape, but then Ayagura had the benefit of those extra laps as well. I was pretty surprised with how quickly he seemed to adapt to the Trackhouse Aprilia. And then Somkiat Chantra, I think, he's just going to grace MotoGP with that fantastic smile all year, even if the Honda does prove to be a bit of a dog for him, certainly in the first half of the campaign. But Aldeguer, we suspected he had the talent for MotoGP. Neil's been watching him closer than perhaps all of us through Moto2 in the last couple of years. I think he's in a fantastic sort of situation to have his rookie season in MotoGP. Watch this space, I guess.
Neil, what about you?
Yeah, you'd be hard pressed to look anywhere other than Aldeguer. I mean, he was fourth fastest, I think, at the end of day 2. I did notice that some of our patrons were getting very excited on our Discord channel, asking whether Fermin could maybe BOS winner this year, to which Dave replied, lol, which maybe wasn't a completely as harsh a response as it sounds. But no, I think it was genuinely quite impressive. I think there was times as well during the test where his crew was it on one of the days where they were holding him back? They didn't want him to go out because they thought he would maybe get a bit too excited and crash. So they're clearly trying to manage his expectations. He's working with Frankie Carcetti, of course, who was formerly with Mark last year. And Frankie has great experience of bringing rookies through. Just look at what he did with Joan Mir in Suzuki in 2019 and 2020. So, yeah, I think it was positive for Fermin. His sprint simulation on the final day was also pretty good. It wasn't quite in the league of the first four. You look at the two Marquez's, Quartararo, Bagnaia, he was a wee bit off that, but he was still faster on average lap time over his sprint simulation than the likes of Acosta, Bezzecchi, Rins, Zarco, very experienced MotoGP names, albeit on a brilliantly well-sorted package and bike. So yeah, Aldeguer did well. I think Agura did also have a great 6 days on the whole. He had a promising sprint simulation in the shakedown test, and he was a wee bit disappointed on the final day that he couldn't quite find the outright lap time that he was hoping for. He said he put 80% of his efforts on that final day into basically doing a really good time attack and didn't quite come. But still, 14th is no disgrace. It wasn't like he was miles back. So I think, both of those guys will be fairly content with how their rookie seasons are shaping up. But yeah, if you're asking me right now who's going to be the top of the rookie stand-ins at the end of the year, then I'll probably go with Fermin.
Yeah, for me, Aldeguer did a great job. He looked good on the bike. I think Frankie Carcetti was quite pleased with everything that he was doing. He was getting through all of the work and making the progress he's supposed to do. Just standing trackside, Agura looked really good. He looked really, really comfortable, really confident, was just riding the bike in the right way. Aldeguer was riding the bike in exactly the right way, looked really good as well. Somkiat Chantra looked really rough. He was really struggling to get the bike stopped. He was really struggling to actually get the thing to turn. I think he's going to be in for a bit of a long season, and he's got a lot of work to do. But then he's also on the most difficult bike to actually learn and adapt to as a rookie.
Aldeguer just needs to do some English lessons and some media training, because it's like listening to a broken air conditioning unit. He just needs to brush up on that side of it, I think, especially if he's going to be fighting for podiums.
Well, how was your Spanish at 19 years old, Ed?
Yeah, but I wasn't being paid to be a public figure, Neil. So if I was, then I probably would have worked on it.
Yeah, I mean, that is the sad fact is that no matter where you're from, everyone speaks English. So if you are a top athlete, you need to have good English, and he needs to work on his English.
I would say as well, though, in Aldeguer's defence, he's also a rider that for much of his junior career, no one expected anything of. So he wasn't put through the Aspar school or anything like that at a young age of having to develop that. He was a stock 600 rider. So nobody believed in him, or nobody wanted to give him the chance. So that also has a bit of an impact on that as well. He probably ended up where, you're not really focusing on that as much as some 12, 13-year-old rider that's been hallmarked or earmarked for success in the European Talent Cup. I think that Aldeguer is an interesting one. And like I've said it on the pod a few times, that I remember whenever I was in CEV and you'd see him come through, speed was always there. We saw it in Moto2 as well. I think he'd front row for 25% of his races or something like that. So he's fast. It's just what you're going to do whenever you get those opportunities on a MotoGP bike. But if you're going to get a MotoGP bike, it might as well be the Ducati. You're still going to do a decent job with it. But we'll move on to our next award. And this one isn't the nicest award, Dave. It's the Nice But Dim award. Who made the big mistake at the Sepang Test?
It's a no-brainer. It has to be Jorge Martin. He's the reigning world champion. He goes out in the morning on an unseasonably cold day, and you have to remember this is unseasonably for Sepang. It was lovely. It was about 24, 25 degrees. The weather was perfect for someone like me. Tires were cold. He crashed and then went back out again, and then had an absolutely massive crash. The inside, the casing of the tire was cold. The outside was fine, but the inside of the casing was cold. He was pushing on the medium tire. They were using the medium tire on the first day because it's not a useful tire. It really isn't. here's the tyre that he used just to warm up, but it needs to be treated with caution. And he didn't treat it with caution, and he hurt himself, and he really punished himself really quite badly. That was it was a big and stupid and needless mistake.
I agree with Dave, but I think I'm going to give the nod to Raul Fernandez for his crash. In one aspect, he was lucky to get away with it. And, he's already turned up in Buriram to complete the second test after having, apparently they were waiting for him to get off the plane to go straight into surgery. But just by virtue of the fact that this was the second year in a row that he's, pretty much trashed the Sepang test, then, a lesson's being learned.
On the
He
first
said
morning.
he said he didn't, and he's already spoken to our colleagues in Thailand, and he said that he cannot comment too much on the crash. He cannot explain it. But, it just seems, foolhardy to have got in that situation again.
Yeah, and I think Massimo Rivola came up to the media center at the end of day one and spoke about it, and was he wasn't going into detail about what happened to Jorge Martin, but he was very clearly pointing the finger at Michelin as the reason behind the crash. But when he was asked about Raul, he basically just said, it's not my place to speak about this, and certainly give the impression that he was less than impressed with what Raul had done. Just to go back on what Dave was saying about Martin, he obviously crashed previously at turn one. I was going through Reddit yesterday, and there's actually a video of that turn one crash. I just assumed that he had lost the front, but he actually had a pretty big high side at turn one, which he was able to get up and walk away from, and he picked his bike up and rode it back to the pits. But there was already that kind of warning of the rear stepping out.
Yep.
And then he goes back out in his first flying lap, and the same thing happens again. And it wasn't the time to be pushing like that. It was almost as if that sort of old Jorge Martin anxiety, seeing his name right down towards the bottom and not having a strong start, was really playing on his mind. So yeah, massively costly mistake for him. I mean, I don't want to do it, but someone's going to have to mention Digia breaking his left collarbone by virtue of losing the front after landing a wheelie. That is not a great thing to do.
It is very funny, though.
Well, I mean, it depends on your persuasion.
And it's the same part of the body that he's knackered, so that could it be a worse kind of place for it to happen? Yeah,
it depends on how you get your kicks, but we all know how you do, Dave. Basking in others' misery. But yeah, no, Digi, I think, is an honourable mention. But I think Ducati are still going to be in a pretty good place with Digi's input or without it on the final 2 days of the Sepang test. I'm really not sure if Aprilia can say the same thing without Martin and Raul's input.
Yeah, just to move on as well now to our last topic really from the Sepang test. Who should be most worried after Sepang? Neil, I'll come straight to you on this one.
Well, it's tough to say. I mean, I think KTM, Honda and Aprilia all have reason to be not concerned. I think Honda, for a start, when you looked at their race simulations at the end of the final day, it did put into perspective just how far away they still are. There was obviously a great deal of enthusiasm because Joan Mir, Joan Zarco were putting in one-off fast lap times. And Mir pretty much every day was around the top six, which is a big step forward. And there is, I think, a real general feeling that Honda is heading in the right direction. There's a good atmosphere. Someone close to Honda told me that it was probably the best Sepang test that they'd had since 2019, which says a lot about some of their recent predicaments. But they are still quite far away, especially when it's really hot and greasy. It seems that they lose quite a bit of performance. But at least they are on the right way, you would say. KTM, there's just this massive question mark. I don't really know how to read them. I mean, Ad, you were saying at the end of the final day that both Aki Ayo and Sebastian Ries's comments were fairly positive, that they got through a massive testing program, lots of new aspects and new things to test. And the riders were, nodding their heads and saying, it's been a good test. We've got through a lot. But Dave, you were also saying that certainly the body language of Pedro Acosta was far from positive. He really looked quite fed up. And Pedro is someone that gives you good material, gives you sound bites, makes his debriefs interesting when he's on form, makes them worth listening to. And I don't think there was one Pedro Acosta debrief throughout the 4 days that was like that at all. It was all very short, snappy. I wouldn't say he was losing patience, but it was clear that he didn't really want to be there, which indicated that things maybe weren't going as he intended. So it's tough to read. It's always tough to read KTM's progress at the Sepang Test. I think this has been a common theme in the last couple of years. And Brad Binder said Sepang Test last year was one of the best tests he's ever had, and you wouldn't say that translated into early season form for him, at least, or for Jack Miller in the factory team, aside from his early salvo in Qatar. So I don't know. This is a very long-winded way of saying I think Aprilia are probably the ones that are most disappointed, Steve, because they have to homologate their engine in a couple of weeks, and their star sign-in acquisition still hasn't really managed to do more than a couple of laps on it. In fact, any laps.
Yeah, from my 2 cents, I think Honda are trying to turn around a big juggernaut, some sort of big, huge oil freighter of a vessel. So they're in the process, but I think it was harder really to judge anything serious from the Sepang Test. KTM, I think, entered very much the spirit of the test by throwing the kitchen sink, it would seem, at trying to make the RC16 cure some of those vibration issues. I think Brad Binder said, we haven't got rid of it. It was most alarmingly seen in Jack Miller's bike, I think, in 2024 at Motegi. And I think, you'll get a real indicator of where KTM are by the end of the first day in Buriram. And, maybe some of the lap times will come. Different track, different condition, different climate, I know. But I think the Austrians still have a few cards up their sleeves, just listening to some of their debriefs and the comments that were coming through. So perhaps, especially in comparison to Yamaha, Honda maybe can think we're on the way, but they still need to be faster with how they're progressing.
Yeah, I mean, to come to KTM, I had a quick chat with someone from KTM, and they said basically because all of the development work was being done by Binder and Acosta because Viñales and Bastianini were adapting to the bike. Bastianini looked absolutely terrible on the bike, like he was really, really struggling, didn't look good at all. I think he has to be worried that it's going to be a long 2 years, but at least he's got a 2-year contract, and you'd have to wonder if he will want to be. I mean, I'm judging this on one test, so it's completely unfair. But yeah, you would have to wonder whether he's having buyer's regret on that one. You would have to also think that maybe KTM are going to be worried if Costa is so irritated, because if he does have a chance to get out and go to Ducati, we know that Ducati are interested in. We know that they'd give him full support in the VR46 squad. So that would be, that would be a possibility. And then you would wonder whether, especially if Digia sort of doesn't pick it up in the first half of the season, whether Ducati say, "Look, thanks, Digia, but no thanks." Apart from that, I think Luca Marini is going to be a bit worried, because I mean, even though I love Luca, he's really, really smart, he's really good also at development. But if Honda start to make a step, and Marini doesn't start to make a step in his results, then you would start to think like, okay, well, we can, maybe move Marini to a development rider role, or even swap him with Zarco, for example. I think there is reason for Marini to be concerned at the moment.
Yeah, and just to come back to Aprilia, I mean, at least KTM have had their 4 riders testing what will be their 2025 package, if not all completely together and in the right shape. But there is an idea that the 2025 package, the engine at least, is kind of sorted. It's confirmed. Whereas with Aprilia, I mean, there's going to be a great deal of guesswork there, I think.
Obviously enough, we've got the Buriram test as well this week. So Neil, I'll come to you straight away, because I know that you have to leave us pretty quickly. But what's your expectation for this weekend's test?
More of the same, really. Lots of question marks. I'm not sure. Well, I think we'll see a Ducati on top, Steve. How about
that? Really going out on a limb there, playing it all on the line.
Peerless. Sign up for the Paddock Pass podcast, everyone.
We'll see Dave complaining about getting up early. What else are we going to?
No, it's tests, so I can miss the morning session and then wake up to find out who's crashed and hurt themselves.
Listen, Buriram's a different type of circuit. So you could see some different kind of names making the lap times. And I think the biggest chart will be of KTM and Yamaha. What kind of speed, what kind of times are they able to post? Because that will also feed into the first Grand Prix you'd expect.
Yeah, and again, it's about grip. The grip there is low. They're using this special rear Michelin with the heat-resistant casing, which again reduces grip, and that is going to be a really, really important factor. We're going to get a better sort of idea of where the teams stand. I should be watching Yamaha and Honda because I think that's where we get to see where how much of a step they've made.
And my prediction is that Morbidelli will be quick again because he was also very lively at the Grand Prix. So he's obviously got some sort of Alex Marquez-esque kind of affinity with that particular layout.
As ever on the Paddock Pass podcast, we've got plenty of content all the way through the week with our Paddock Note show from the Bury Ram test. So check out patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast for that. And we've got lots of competitions coming this year on Patreon for all of our patrons. And Adam, one of them very exciting. We've got 2 Paddock Passes for the Grand Prix of the Americas. And we're partnered up with Pole Position Travel as well for accommodation at that round.
Yeah, more details soon on this competition. But like you say, Steve, 2 passes for Kota. And with, Pole Position Travel, who have a fantastic range of packages, not just travel arrangements, but also activities to do at the race events themselves, both World Superbike and MotoGP. Then they're going to be supporting us this year, as well as some of our patrons. If you sign up to our Patreon channel, then we'll be giving away a special code where people can get discounts on those trip bookings. And we'll also have a couple of special shows talking about which events to go to, how to get to them, a couple of tips for logistics as well for fans, and whatever else is to enjoy MotoGP or World Superbike a bit better. But it's cool to have an alliance with Pole Position Travel this year.
Yeah, I mean, I usually give a talk at Assen to the people, and it's always like, it's always a good crowd. It's real race fans. It's knowledgeable race fans as well. It's people who are really committed to racing. So it's a good group of people to travel with.
Yeah, we're going to have a couple of meetups through the course of the year in conjunction with them as well. So that's going to be a lot of fun just to be able to have basically a live show for us as well on the podcast. So check that out on patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. We've got a new tier actually for this year as well on Patreon, the Paddock Experts tier. And on that, you'll actually be able to get Zoom calls with all of us on the podcast as well, just to be able to ask whatever you want about MotoGP. And I mentioned earlier on about the Discord server as well. It's proved pretty popular with all of our patrons just to be able to ask questions, talk to each other, and be able to get all the latest news from MotoGP or World Superbikes. So as we bring our pod to a close for today, we'll be back next week to recap all the action from Bury Ram. Myself, Gordo, and Evo will be back next week as well with a World SBK podcast from Phillip Island as we get ready for the first round of the season. And we're just straight into it already. Neil's been able to rest up for January, but now it's flat out all the way through to the start of the season.